when you read Tulsi Ramayana, that's 500 years ago, he talks about how God allows all creatures inside him, and he uses charachar, which is plants and animals, nara, napunsak, nari. So man, queer and nari. So the use of the word queer, and there are words for queer. Napunsak, not quite a man. What does it mean? Is it referring to a lesbian? Not quite a man, because she desires a woman, but she's not quite a man. Or a homosexual. He is a man but doesn't desire a woman. Or does it refer to a transgender person? So these words are very strange. Napunsaka. The Bhagavad Gita has a word called klipa. There is another word in the Buddhist literature, there is a word called PANDAKKA. And the story goes that the PANDAKKA has a strong sexual appetite, and therefore the Buddha says he shall not be ordained as a monk. He is not ostracized. He's just said that isko tum muni nahi bana sakte. You can't make him a monk. But he's acknowledged. He exists. Or she exists. So when you read the Vinaya Pitaka, there is continuous reference to creatures, living beings, Jivatma, whose body is neither male nor female, or whose mind is neither male nor female. Which means there's a comfort with the absence of boxes. Now you can argue, what does it mean? Is it neuter, male, female, neuter? Is it male, female, androgynous? That's open to speculation. But what is interesting is that you don't find this in Greek mythology. You don't find this in Abrahamic mythology. Greek mythology has stories of man-boy love. Very clean man-boy love. So there will be a man who falls in love with a boy. So the king of the Greek gods, Zeus, falls in love with a boy called Ganymedes. Or Poseidon, the god of the sea, falls in love with a boy called Pelops. Or there are women, the moment they become intelligent and powerful, are not associated with men at all. So the goddess Athena has no male consort or lover. Artemis, who loves hunting, has only the company of virgin girls. So these kind of stories, Greek mythology is giving one particular form, man-boy love, women who don't like male company but prefer female company. And then you come to Indian traditions where there is a very different language being used. They use gender repeatedly and always talk of three genders. 1, 2 and neither 1 and 2. Or 1 and 2. And that's what makes you start thinking. It's a culture which is comfortable with the ambiguous, with the word queer. That everything cannot be put in a box. Life, the diverse nature, falls in line with philosophy. Because the philosophy speaks about diversity obsessively. You see, there are two types of mythologies in the world. One mythology says all creatures in the world are equal. The other mythology says all creatures in the world are diverse. Equality and diversity are the opposites of each other. An equal world creates a homogeneous society. It works towards homogeneity and therefore deprives everybody of identity. A diverse world celebrates identity and therefore everybody is different. But the problem with that is that we become unequal and eventually hierarchical. So both have problems. Equality will create homogeneity. Diversity will create hierarchy. What do you choose? What should you choose? And these are the questions that emerge when you start reading the mythology. For example, let's look at the stories. In the stories, there says that when Krishna is playing the Rasa Leela with the Gopikas, so many gods want to participate and they want to see Krishna sing and dance with the Gopikas. They approach Vrindavan, but the river Yamuna says you cannot enter this grove. It is meant only for women. So the gods so desperately want to see Krishna that they become women. They enter the waters and they come out as women. So in Mathura there is a temple called Gopeshwar temple, where the Shivaling is decorated with a nut of a woman. So Shiva, the great supremely masculine god, has no problems wearing a nut so that he can see Krishna dance. Or there is the story of Aruna, that is the god of twilight. The god of twilight wants to see the dance of the Apsaras in Indralok, but nobody is allowed to see the dance of the Apsara. The only man allowed is Indra. So he becomes a woman. and comes into this hall, and Indra looks at this woman and says, oh, I've never seen such a beautiful woman, and therefore I must have sex with her. So Indra is obsessed with this, right? And he produces a child on her. And the child is called Vali in the Ramayana. And then he goes, and Aruna goes and meets the sun god, and the sun god says, why have you taken a female form? Show it to me. And he falls in love with her when he sees the female form of Aruna, and they have a child, and that child is called Sugriva. So Vali and Sugriv suddenly have a mother who is not quite a woman. How do I see the story? How do I decode the story? What is the meaning of this story? Or there are stories where Vishnu turns into Mohini. So she becomes feminine. She chooses the female body to enchant Shiva. This transformation of gender is so casual. It's talked about repeatedly, not just in the Hindu traditions, but also the Buddhist traditions, also the Jain traditions. There is the story in Yoga Vasishtha of a queen who is very, very educated, but a husband cannot accept the fact that his wife can be educated. Says, I will get knowledge only from the sages in the forest. So he goes to the forest. So the wife says, how do I get this man back? So she enters the forest in the form of a man, educates him and brings him back. You can see the misogyny in the story. And who saves the queen? Her comfort with being queer. She becomes a man to bring him back. So these stories where gender is so fluid, the body is very fluid. What meaning do we give these stories? In the Brahmotsavam celebrations, every year, which happens in Tirupati, the Lord is taken on a palanquin. He has different dresses. On one day he dresses up as a woman. Vishnu has no problem wearing a sari. How do I decode this? Is he talking about the flesh should not be taken too seriously? The soul is more important. And the flesh can be male, female or anything. Is he referring to desire? Is he referring to, what is he referring to? These are the questions that emerge repeatedly. The fact that such stories, I will never see a story in the Abrahamic tradition of God who is also a woman. Or a prophet who cross-dresses. That's unacceptable. Different worldview. So what kind of a worldview am I hearing? I'm hearing about, when you read Tamil poetry, and in Tamil poetry also you find this word like pedi. And strange one, maybe a pronunciation I'm not 100% sure, but there is a reference to men who cross-dress, women who cross-dress. When you go to the Madurai Meenakshi temple, you will find a full-breasted woman with a moustache. What does it mean? Or a very macho-looking man, but bent like a dancer. What does it mean? These are questions that emerge repeatedly. Why the need for these words? Why this comfort with different kinds of ideas? For example, they will say the temple should be, the image of the Yari is important. Yari has an elephant head with a lion's body. And you're like, why a mix? Why do you have to mix these two? Elephant ko elephant rakho, lion ko lion rakho. Why does the artist insist on merging the two? Because lines have to be blurred. These lines are human creations. In nature there are no boundaries. Boundaries are created by man, by language. In Sanskrit the language has no gaps between words. The words is called sandhi. The words telescope into each other. In English we separate the word. There is a pause, there is punctuation. We separate things. You know, the Namalvar's poetry says, where is God? And he says, here, there and everywhere in between. What is he referring to? Here, there and everything in between. These are only in the 20th century, late 20th century, did the West come up with the idea of the queer. It has always been part of Indian tradition. The idea, the acceptance is a different conversation. Idea, ये विचार है. We are saying the world is like this. Whether you can handle is up to you. अगर अहंकार है, तो तुमको divisions दिखाई देंगे. The divisions will be rigid. Because when you have ahankar, you are so insecure that you want the world to be in your control, like a neat Excel sheet. Everybody loves Excel sheet, right? Mostly control freaks. Because everything is in neat little boxes. Comforts you. But the moment your mind expands, the moment you're comfortable, you are able to see the information, the knowledge and the wisdom beyond the data. You grow out of the Excel sheet and you move into the PowerPoint presentation. That's the world of the Atma, where there are no lines. There can be lines if you want there to be lines. But you're able to see things without boundaries. And you're able to appreciate desire in all its fluid forms. That, ladies and gentlemen, is queer mythology. And I think we should be proud of our country that is so comfortable with this idea. And hopefully we'll figure out that also exists in reality. Thank you.
How do you react when people majorly cite religion as the sole factor for homophobia? And how far apart are religion and mythology anyway?
So the first question is, when they quote religion as homophobe, for the reason of homophobia, it's usually because Alpa Buddhi Mahabhayankar. I always tell people that, if you are familiar with big data, and then you meet a person who is challenging you with a pivot table. I can say it in IIT. I hope I can't say this everywhere. But that's the tragedy, So many people, any form of hatred is usually, people are hateful, but they want to attribute it to different things. So they'll attribute to religion, they'll attribute to God, they'll attribute to the mother. So Freud decided everything happens because of your parents. You are a hateful person, take responsibility for it. Religion को आधार बनाने की कोई ज़रूरत नहीं है. And the same is true for love. You are a loving person, not because of religion, but despite it. Religion is just a way of looking at the world. When rules play a very important role, and it is about social control, then religion, that's the word of religion. Religion is about control and rules. Mythology is a universal language used in both religious and non-religious setup. So you can have mythology in a nation state. Nation states have mythology. So mythology is neither religious nor secular. It can be both. Because it is about stories, symbols and rituals. So propaganda uses mythology. But it's a short term. It doesn't really work. So mythology is a larger subject and religion is a subset within it.
On Wikipedia about Lord Varuna and his partner Mitra, and they had a baby to this surrogate.
Yes.
I want to know more about that. I could not find anything.
See, the problem is Vedas are extremely complex texts, and anybody who says I understand the Vedas is instantly you should know you're meeting a fool. Because when you read Vedas from a literal point of view, they have a very complex meaning. When you read it as code, for example, Dayanand Saraswati and Aurobindo read it as code, they found mystical traditions in it. If you read Fritz Stahl, he will say that these are meaningless verses where the power is only on the chanting and the purpose is the chanting. If you talk to people who believe in the mystical tradition, they'll say meaning doesn't matter, the vibrations matter. So the Veda is an extremely complex subject and there is no one thing. But yes, there is a little bit of stories that emerge. But the story that you're talking is not from the Vedas, it comes from the Puranic traditions. And the Puranic traditions is that when the Apsara, depending on which story you read, it's either Menaka or it's Rambha, walking along, the two gods, Varuna and Mitra, who are always seen as together. And by the way, Vedas are full of binary gods. So Indra and Agni, Indra and Vishnu, they'll always refer to gods as two people. The two shall come together. Now, whether we take this two as a couple or as friends is up to you. For example, Agni is called Dvimatri, having two mothers. Now, what does it mean? Are they referring to a same-sex family? Are they referring to just, it's a metaphor? It's up to you, you decide. Very difficult to decode these things. But yes, there are lots of two men. So when we say male partner and all that, we should be a little careful. It's a choice. You can see it that way. You have the full freedom to do it. But put the caveat that it is your reading and not the reading. And therefore you have the story that the nymph walks and Varuna and Mitra get so excited by their beauty that they ejaculate. and it falls in a pot, and two sages are born, Vasishtha and Agastya. So these are the stories that emerge. Now how do you read this? For example, Nara Narayana are sitting and meditating, and Indra sends all his apsaras, and Narayana smiles and he slaps his thigh, and from it comes the lady Urvashi. Urvashi is she who resides in the thigh. So a man creates a woman, and Nara Narayana create this woman. So how do you read the story? So these are stories which exist. Want to know more? Please buy my book Shikhandi. But how do you interpret it is totally up to you. Every scholar will have their own interpretation, and you'll be very careful with what it means. There will be out there somebody who will get very, because he knows the truth, and of course he wants to kill you because you cannot have any other truth but his truth. You know, so there are such people out there in the world. So, Hanuman Chalisa leke jana.
Do animal exhibit LGBT character?
Yes, of course. Just do a Google search on National Geographic. You'll find 1500 species. For example, dolphins are always, you'll find pairings which is not necessarily based on gender. You find them in giraffe. There are 1500 species which have been identified. So I believe you're an IIT student, so science student. So just check a book on botany, zoology. And as I said, most plants are androgynous. So every plant that you see is queer.
So over the course of history, have there been instances where there is a change in the story of the mythology which has reflected a change in the worldview?
Yes. So for example, when I read the Vishnu Puran, which is roughly around 5th century AD, there is no reference to the goddess. By the time I come to the 10th century, the goddess plays a very important role. So somewhere between the 5th and 10th century, the Shakta Parampara becomes popular. It doesn't mean it didn't exist. It becomes popular enough to be written in the Sanskrit language. It may have existed in non-Sanskrit oral tradition for a long, long time. I will never be able to prove it. And there are codes and clues that it was there. But I see the role of the goddess emerging very dramatically. I'll give you an example. The idea of Lakshman Rekha. In the Valmiki Ramayana, there is no Lakshman Rekha. 2000 years ago. First time I come to know about it is in Krittibasa Ramayana, which is about 500 years ago in Bengali. So it reveals a shift. So you see that. So, or for example, Shabri ke Bear. You have first reference to it in about 300 years ago. Before that, did it exist in oral tradition? Maybe. I have no proof. What do I have proof of is a Hindi-speaking verse called Bhakta Rasamandali or something like that, which has a story of Shabri. So stories change dramatically over time. In the Vedas, for example, the gods have no vahanas. No vahanas. Only in the Puranic tradition, all the gods have different vahanas. Lions, tigers, snakes.
So you say that the idea existed like in mythology since whatever the century was,
Yes.
but the acceptance did not. Why would that happen?
No, I don't have enough evidence for the acceptance. I have evidence of the stories.
Sure.
You see, it's very difficult. You know, when you're studying the past, it is very difficult. You have stories. You know, it's like, for example, you look at Ashoka's pillars. Ashoka pillar ke basis pe people have decided how Ashoka thinks. That is like looking at the Prime Minister's Man Ki Baat and deciding this is how the Modi era was. Historians will never do that. Right? You can't look at a king's propaganda and decide the reality of society. So what I know of Ashoka and his period is I have his posters. And his posters make him look very nice. Doesn't mean he was a nice man. So I mean, maybe, possible, but it means nothing. It's just references. Because when I read the stories about him, they are very ambiguous. In fact, our understanding of Ashoka comes from H.G. Wells, who also wrote science fiction. And the understanding of Ashoka is that. It doesn't mean he was not a decent, we don't know. And a good scholar and a good scientist will say, I don't know. So I am absolutely confident that the narrative shows a very broad mind. What actually happened in society, I am not 100% sure. So for example, when people talk about Dharma Shastras, there is a verse in the Yaksha's, one of those books, where it says the property shall be equally divided between men and women. Yaksha's Nirukta. This is a line written over 2000 years ago. How many of us know it? Does it reflect reality or does it reflect the imagination of a broad-minded man 2,500 years ago? We will be only told Manusmriti, Manusmriti, Manusmriti. Oh, where women are treated very badly. Or we will cherry pick verses which show that India was a misogynist society. But I can show you equal number of verses show the other. So understanding the past has to be done very carefully. We don't really know what it means. You know, there are many people who believe that ancient India had aeroplanes, but no homosexuality. अभी उसको तुम कैसे समझाओगे? Convinced? No, you know, after that you just say, "Huh." What? A lady, somebody? Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So I was asking, was there a period specifically where the idea, even the idea of queer, was like wasn't allowed to step into the next generation? Because according to the Indian philosophy, they say like Brahmins, they had initially karma and artha were also very important part of the philosophy. But after, because they got a competition from Jainism and Buddhism, that's when they thought of hierarchy.
Yes, got it. I know what you're saying.
So is it during that period perhaps like they forgot everything?
So, see, it's a good question, but it's also a difficult question to answer. What do I know is that the queer idea, Nara Nari Napansaka, this concept of these three worlds is found in Buddhist literature, Jain literature, Hindu literature. So it's across the board. It's there in the Vedas, it's there in the Brahmanas, it's there in the Upanishads, it's there in the Puranas, it's consistent, it's there in regional literature. So the idea is there everywhere. However, from the 10th century onwards, and that's 1,000 years ago, just before Islam enters India, just around that time, you find a rise of monasticism. It's a huge rise in monasticism. So Adi Shankaracharya represents it, and the idea of being a monk, of sex and pleasure and power being bad, becomes peaks. It rises, rises, rises very high, to the point that to be holy is to be celibate. And therefore all ideas of pleasure, heterosexual or homosexual, start becoming marginalized. So pleasure women, the Ganikas, the Nartakis, Natis, who were independent women with their own careers, who were pleasure. Now pleasure houses doesn't mean providing sex. It also means providing food and providing shelter. So like restaurants and bars and so they dance also, music, all those women who didn't, for example, when you read Madhumegala and Shilapadikaram, women had only three options. They could either be married to a man, they could be a nun, or they could be independent women, whatever this means. These women were gradually marginalized. The only way they could survive was in a temple, so they became Devadasis. Gradually even that became vulgar. And by the 19th and 20th century, the British called them Notch girls. The Brahminical society said these are negative, evil women who are spoiling our society. And today, for example, if I go to Puri temple, at one time there were 1,000 priests and 1,000 dancing girls. Today there are only 1,000 priests. Where are the dancing girls? Because they all apparently were dirty women. So there was a conscious movement against pleasure, including queer pleasure. Because queer pleasure is only pleasure, nothing else.
Omkar briefly mentioned that you also talk about leadership. Do we have references or examples of queer leadership?
Define queer leadership.
Leaders who are queer.
Okay. Krishna, if you consider him as a leader, also has a long plait. And in art, he's always described wearing an alta. And he's very famous for, this is a very famous called Gore Gwala Ki Leela, where he and Radha exchange clothes. And for a day, he becomes a gopika. Or there are stories where all the gopikas come and tease him and they say that we'll dress you up like a woman. And they think that's going to be a punishment because तुम्हारे हाथ में चूड़ी पहनाएंगे. And Krishna says, अरे अच्छी वाली चूड़ी पहनाओ ना. Is he queer? Is he comfortable with his sexuality so much that he doesn't mind dressing in any costume you want? In the Mahabharata, he turns into Mohini. But he is the Bhagavad Gita. In Bhagavad Gita, he says, I have two yonis. I have two wombs, Purusha and Prakriti. He describes Purusha and Prakriti as yonis, which is womb. Metaphor, symbol. Here is a deity who is very comfortable talking about him in feminine and masculine terms. There is no desire to be manly or macho. Who loves Shringar, who loves Alamkar, jewelry. Imagine today a man saying, "Aaj mujhe jewelry khareedna hai." Krishna wouldn't have a problem going out and saying, "Jasmine Mogra bhi khareedna hai, silk bhi khareedna hai, makeup bhi khareedna hai." What would we call such a man today? So queer is a mindset, a comfort where you are not willing to see borders. You are okay with it. Tension nahi hota. You don't get nervous and you won't attack. That's the mindset. So I think yes, there is Krishna. And of course there's Shiva, who doesn't mind being half a woman. People have not thought it through. It's a great idea. We all want to be equal, but we don't want to be the same. I want to be different. I have a right because my identity demands it. Equality is not sameness. It's about, please understand, the West doesn't understand this. I give you an example. One of the topmost banks in the world calls me for a lecture on diversity. And this is my brief. We want more women who think like us. We want more Muslim women who think like us. We want more Chinese people who think like us. We want more blacks who think like us. We want more LGBT who think like us. That's not diversity. That's cosmetics. They want same. सिर्फ वो काला होना चाहिए, वो पीला होना चाहिए, वो थोड़ा गे होना चाहिए, लेकिन काम वही करेगा. That's not the meaning of diversity. Diversity is different people thinking differently because in nature, as everybody knows, mutation is required and diversity is required for survival. Mindsets are important. So, equality often goes towards homogeneity. So, what's the counterforce? Heterogeneity. Heterogeneity is about diversity, but the negative part of heterogeneity is it will invariably create inequality, it will invariably create hierarchy, and therefore you have to push back of equality. So it's a manthan, it's not this or that. Manthan where force and counterforce are working together. It is not a tug of war. So West only understands tug of war. Ye ya wo. Ye ya wo. That's why the Western understanding of Hinduism borders on the absurd. Because they look at it through the lens of equality. You have to look at the lens of diversity. And then you'll see how complex this picture is. It is very, very... India is one of the most complex statements in the world. It exasperates people. Because it's what is called dynamic diversity. It's not just diverse, it is also dynamic. The concept of time, kala, is there in Buddhism, Jainism, Hinduism. You don't find it in mythologies around the world. This obsession with time. So dynamic diversity, to factor in time, is, now imagine a moving target all the time. What standard operating procedure will you give? Sorry, keep forgetting it's not IIM, it's IIT. So I'm using a lot of management words.